Hello. Evolution has produced so much diversity of species in the animal kingdom. More than 1.5 million species of animals have already been classified by zoologists, and thousands more are described each year. Some zoologists estimate that species named so far constitute less than 20% of all living animals, and less than 1% of all those that have existed. Animal diversity is not random, but has definite order. Humans, cattle, birds, and horses are distinct groups of animals, yet they do share some important features, including vertebrae and homeothermy, that separate them from even more dissimilar forms such as insects and flatworms. All human cultures classify familiar animals according to patterns in animal diversity. These classifications have many purposes. Some societies classify animals according to their usefulness or destructiveness to human endeavors. Others may group animals according to their roles in mythology. Biologists organize animal diversity in a nested hierarchical of groups within groups according to evolutionary relationships, as revealed by ordered patterns of their sharing of homologous features. This ordering is called natural system because it reflects relationship that exists among animals in nature, outside the context of human activity. A systematic zoologist has three major goals: to discover all species of animals, to reconstruct their evolutionary relationships, and to communicate those relationships by constructing an informative taxonomic system. Taxonomy is a search for order in the diversity of animal life, guided by Darwin's theory of common descent. Taxonomy also attempts to systematize identified organisms into species and related groups, and have been subsumed by the broader science of systematics or comparative biology. Adjusting our taxonomic system to accommodate evolution has produced many problems and controversies. Currently, old taxonomic classifications are on the verge of revamping or changing to accommodate new evolutionary findings. Aristotle was the first to group organisms according to structural similarities, but it was Carl von Linné, or in his Latinized name, Carolus Linnaeus, who produced the hierarchical system of taxonomy 124 years later, that grouped all animals and plants into 7 taxonomic levels of groupings or ranks, namely kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. With additional subdivisions of these ranks, there are now more than 30 taxonomic ranks recognized. Phylum could be further ranked into subphyla, class could be ranked further into subclass, orders into suborders, families into subfamilies, and so on and so forth. Taxonomy was initiated by Linnaeus in 1735 when he published his Systema Naturae. Taxonomy is the biological discipline that identifies, describes, classifies, and names extant and extinct species and other taxa. Darwin's theory of evolution came 124 years later. Integrative taxonomy has been proposed as a framework to bring together these conceptual and methodological developments revealed by molecular studies of eukaryotes. Introduction of evolutionary theory into animal taxonomy has changed the taxonomist's role from one of classification to one of systematization. The activity of a taxonomist, whose groupings of species represent units of common evolutionary descent, is systematization, not classification. Species placed into a taxonomic group include the most recent common ancestor of the group and its descendants, and thus form a branch of phylogenetic tree of life. The species of a group thus formed constitute a system of common descent, not a class defined by possession of an essential characteristic In classification, a taxonomist asks whether a species being classified contains the defining features of a particular taxonomic class. In systematization, a taxonomist asks whether the characteristics of a species confirm or reject the hypothesis that it descends from the most recent common ancestor of a particular taxon. Thus, Linnaean taxonomy has shifted to evolutionary taxonomy. Although the nested hierarchical classification has been retained, the relationships of population in question is now diagnosed according to shared homologous characters. Following the appearance of On the Origin of Species, tree of life representations has become more popular in scientific works. The Linnaean way of naming animal species in a two-worded Latinized name is still followed today. The rules of using and giving a binomial species name has been retained. The first name is the genus name, which is written with a capital first letter, followed by the species epithet name, all in lowercase. The rule that the genus name should be a noun, while the species epithet name is an adjective, still follows. The species name cannot be written alone. The completed binomial name must be used to name the species of the animal. At this point, I wish to throw you a basic question about the scientific name. Why is the binomial name or scientific name of organisms always written formally in Latin? Why not use the common name? Give two reasons and submit this as an individual assignment in short bond size and PDF. Submit this the following day. There are 5 criteria by which a candidate population is recognized for species identification in systematics or taxonomy. One is that they have common descent and that they are a small grouping that is distinct from other populations. They have reproductive community and they have geographic range and evolutionary duration. By common descent, the members of the species is traceable to a common ancestral population. The species are thus historical entities, and they have small distinct grouping. They show the smallest distinct grouping of organisms sharing patterns of ancestry and descent. Morphological characters traditionally have been important in identifying such groups, but chromosomal and molecular characters are now used extensively for this purpose. They have reproductive community, that is, the members of the species are reproductive and capable of interbreeding, which excludes other non-members of the species, and that they have geographic range, that is, the species has a certain pattern of distribution in space. It may be widely distributed or cosmopolitan, or that their distribution is limited only to a small area, that is, they are endemic. And they have evolutionary distribution. According to the theory of punctuated equilibrium, species may last only between 5 to 10 million years. And in this particular case, the species has a particular distribution in time. Of the 7 major species concepts in biology, there are 5 listed here. That includes typological or morphological species concept, biological species concept, evolutionary species concept, cohesion species concept, and phylogenetic species concept. Typological or morphological species concept are species that manifest distinctive or the average morphological characters typical of that population, usually the morphological. It is considered as the archetype or the type specimen, which are often labeled and stored in museums to represent the standard or to compare all other species to it. Biological species concept are species which are reproductive by nature and are reproductively isolated from other populations. Their reproductive capacity is what occupies the main definition of this species concept. And in nature, they often occupy a particular niche. The species status can be evaluated directly by conducting breeding experiments. And so this has been the most influential concept of species, inspired by Darwinian evolutionary theory. Another species concept is the evolutionary species concept, which is defined as a single lineage of ancestor-descendant populations that maintains its identity from other such lineages, and that it has its own evolutionary tendencies and historical fate. The cohesion species concept is very much like the evolutionary species concept. It is an evolutionary lineage that served as the arena of action of basic microevolutionary forces such as gene flow, genetic drift, and natural selection. The phylogenetic species concept are defined as the irreducible basal grouping of organisms diagnosably distinct from other such groupings and within which there is a parental pattern of ancestry and descent. Molecular studies have revealed that the occurrence of cryptic or sibling species are also found in many populations, which are indistinguishable by morphological standards alone. And so our concepts of species have become more sophisticated now, but the diversity and arguments of these different concepts and their disagreements surrounding their use is as diverse as the organisms are since Darwin's time. The various competing concepts of species have a common underlying principle despite their differences. In each case, a species constitutes a segment of a population level lineage, that is the general lineage concept of species. Current disagreements concerning concepts of species should not be considered counterproductive. Rather, the conflicts among the current concepts should lead to deeper appreciation of the complexity of life. In many cases, different concepts agree on the locations of species boundaries, and disagreements identify particularly interesting cases of evolution in action. Understanding the conflicting perspectives rather than learning a single species concept is a distinctly fruitful exercise in the study of zoology. One of the basic technique or tools of identifying and classifying species is DNA barcoding of species. DNA barcoding is a technique for identifying organisms to species level using sequence information from a standard gene present in all animals. The mitochondrial gene encoding cytochrome C oxidase subunit 1 or CO1, which often contains about 650 nucleotide base pairs, is the standard barcode region for animals. DNA sequences of CO1 usually vary among individuals of the same species, but not extensively, so that variation within species is much smaller than differences among species. DNA barcoding does not solve, however, the controversies regarding the use of different species concepts, but it often permits the origin of the specimen to be identified to a particular local population, which is valuable information regardless of the species status that a taxonomist assigns to that population. The second half of Chapter 10 will be covered in the next video lecture on taxonomic characters and phylogenetic reconstruction. Meanwhile, you are reminded of the assignment that was given in the middle of this video lecture.